Did he quit or was he fired? As the usual question following the departure of any notable band member began to circulate around the San Francisco and LA metal communities, Lars Ulrich saw to it that such speculation was brought to a grinding halt. He called all of his and Dave Mustaine's mutual friends to let them know exactly how things had gone down. As if this wasn't bad enough, salt was rubbed into Mustaine's open wounds when he learned that Metallica's debut album, Kill 'Em All, featured not one, but 4 songs that Mustaine had been the chief songwriter of, despite his parting request to James Hetfield at the bus depot. Mustaine figured that it was no accident, but more a case of Metallica figuring that their degenerate, drug-dealing, alcohol-swilling former bandmate wouldn't amount to much, and would therefore never represent a challenge. During this time of soul-searching, Mustaine scored a gig as a telemarketer, a job typically reserved for people with no other prospects. Half the time, Mustaine turned up high, or got high, on his lunch break. He described his boss as a strong but fair woman, and one day, she asked Dave if he could get her some weed. He dutifully obliged. Soon after, he quit the job, but not before making enough money to get back on his feet and secure an apartment back in Hollywood. One morning, Mustaine was awoken from a drunken slumber at his new apartment by the rhythmic pounding of a bass guitar. It was the opening bass line to Van Halen's Running with the Devil. While Mustaine might have appreciated a little Van Halen, a hungover Mustaine had little patience for Michael Anthony's famous bass line. "Shut the fuck up!" He picked up a potted plant and hurled it onto the AC unit of the offending apartment below. The music stopped. Then, a knock on the door. What now? In a fit of rage, Dave Mustaine opened the door, only to find 2 innocent-looking teenagers in bell-bottoms, high-tops, and cheap leather jackets standing there, proceeding to ask him, "Hey, you know where we can get some cigarettes?" "Yeah, there's a store in the corner." But the pair of teenagers had another question for Dave. You old enough to buy some beer?" "Now you're talking." The newfound friends shared a case of Heineken, and while Mustaine might have found the pair irritating, he also found them endearing, especially the long-haired Dave Ellefson. Dave Ellefson, born on the 12th of November 1964, was the son of a Minnesota farmer. He had earned his father's blessing to venture south to California in order to study music at the Musicians Institute. But Ellefson never took a single class. He instead tried to make it in the music business from day one, and clearly he could play the bass, or at least the opening line to Running with the Devil. Mustaine became Ellefson's big brother, so much so that to this day, Ellefson is affectionately referred to as Junior amongst the Megadeth faithful. Adopting the moniker of Megadeth from the lyrics Mustaine penned on the bus ride across the continent, the pair joined forces to become the nucleus of the band, before trying out a number of musicians in quick succession to join them, including Slayer's Kerry King on guitar. They secured, albeit temporarily, the talents of drummer Lee Rausch, who just so happened to break his leg a week before one of Megadeth's first gigs. Instead of delaying, Mustaine cajoled Rausch into playing the gig. On the day of the gig, Rausch removed the cast before the show, and it was just black. Totally unrecognizable. Nonetheless, the drummer rose to the occasion and played the gig, much to the satisfaction of Dave Mustaine. Lee Rausch was one tough motherfucker. But Rausch left the band shortly thereafter to go on a spiritual journey and find himself. Mustaine never heard from him again. This opened the door to Megadeth's first mainstay drummer, Gar Samuelson, to assume the position behind the kit. Samuelson was a jazz-trained virtuoso, and he also happened to be a heroin addict. Mustaine recalls one incident where Gar was half asleep, sitting on a chair with a cigarette dangling between his fingers. The cigarette had burned down to the filter, and Mustaine could see that the cigarette had already burned his skin. Gar didn't even notice. "Wow, this is going to be fun," said Mustaine. "The guy's like a sadist or something. What's next? A cattle prod?" But despite his misgivings, the dude could play. While Mustaine was no stranger to drugs, he'd stayed away from heroin, and one day he confronted Gar. "I don't understand why you guys like to do that shit." "You mean smack?" "Yeah, what's the big deal?" "Dude, if you want to be a great musician, you have to try heroin. You'll see, it's like being back in the womb." Well, Dave Mustaine wanted to be great, and this set into motion events that would see him make not one, but 17 trips to rehab over the years. The search for a guitarist led Mustaine to Gar Samuelson's former jazz fusion band buddy, Chris Poland. Mustaine listened to Poland play for all of 10 minutes before declaring that he had the job. Megadeth now had a formidable lineup, and a formidable mission statement to go with it: to become the fastest, utmost heaviest, most ultra-furious heavy metal band in history. And with that, the quartet proceeded to go out and get loaded. Despite the less than wholesome lifestyle that the young group shared, they managed to record a 3-track EP, which did for them what No Life Till Leather did for Metallica: spread the word. Meanwhile, Metallica had found themselves a new guitarist. It just so happened that while Dave Mustaine was aboard that 4-day trip across the continent, Kirk Hammett was on his way via plane to New York City to meet with the band. Kirk Hammett was born on November 18, 1962 in San Francisco. He was the guitarist for San Francisco-based thrash metalers Exodus, and so the guys in Metallica knew him well. At the audition, Kirk was asked to play Seek and Destroy, a song from Metallica's first album. He pulled off the solo, and within 2 minutes, Hetfield thought, "Things are gonna be okay." Kirk Hammett was hired instantly. And before too long, the new lineup had recorded their debut album, Kill 'Em All. Metallica's Kill 'Em All was an absolute hit by this point, selling 17,000 copies in the first 5 months after its release in July of 1983. And Lars Ulrich continued to downplay the contributions of Mustaine in interviews with the press, making dismissive remarks such as, "He's just a footnote." He even went as far as trashing Mustaine's guitar playing, a bold statement for a drummer who to this very day is criticized for failing to keep time. On the back of the heat generated by Megadeth's demo EP and their blistering live performances, the quartet made a trip to New York City to meet with A&R executives. And after several meetings that appeared to go nowhere, Mustaine angrily walked down the street before an associate from Combat Records, who Mustaine had just met with, ran down the street after him. "Hey, wait up! They want to sign you!" With that, Megadeth had a record deal to record what would become their debut album, Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good. Mustaine had grand designs for the album cover, featuring his comic book-inspired mascot, Vic Rattlehead. But what he proposed and what the record label came back with could not have been any further removed from each other. Is this some kind of joke? The cover depicted the skull of Vic Rattlehead, all right, except it looked more like an egg, with ketchup posing as fake blood. It was really amateur, and perhaps that was befitting of an album that was neither critically nor commercially successful. Its most successful song, if you'd call it that, was a cover of Lee Hazelwood's "These Boots Were Made for Walking." Mustaine might have planned to walk all over Metallica with his new boots, but Metallica were already well into their second act. Ride the Lightning, Metallica's sophomore album, had been released in July of 1984, several months before Megadeth's debut album, and it represented a quantum leap in both technical proficiency, songwriting, and production over its predecessor. The band's label, Megaforce, pressed 75,000 copies for the US market, while in Europe, Metallica sold 85,000 copies of Ride the Lightning before the end of the year, and were rewarded with a cover story in the famed Kerrang! Magazine. They also managed to break the Billboard 100 with absolutely zero radio play, quite the achievement for a thrash metal band. Megadeth might have fired their first shot, but Metallica could virtually be heard collectively exclaiming, "Did you hear something?" in response. Metallica were indeed riding the lightning, but tragedy was just around the corner. This episode of Battle of the Bands was written, narrated, and produced by me, Steve Gliveski. For full episode show notes, including all of the sources for this episode, head over to nofilter.media/battle. You will also find a whole bunch of other podcasts that No Filter Media is producing. If you enjoyed this episode of Battle of the Bands, I'd love it if you showed your appreciation by subscribing, leaving a review, or telling a friend who you think might also enjoy the show. It's the support of people like you that ensures that I can continue to bring you episodes just like this one, absolutely free. Until next time, cue those house lights.
This has been a No Filter Media production.
Say what you want.